Hey everyone, it's Rob with 4Songs. Yeah, I know, it's been a while since my last episode, but I gotta tell you, it's gonna be a while before the next one too. It's just the way things are going. Time is not my friend these days. But if you are so inclined and don't want to miss out, I suggest you hit that subscribe button. It's gotta be somewhere, however you're listening to this, so just click it so you don't miss anything. Follow me on Twitter at 4songs2. That's at 4songs numeral 2. You never know when I might sneak an episode in the next couple weeks. I just can't guarantee when that's going to be. So best thing to do is subscribe so you don't miss anything. And I really hope this next episode is worth the wait, because for me it was. And I say that about all my podcasts because they're all pretty special to me. But this one's pretty special to me too. For a number of reasons. Number one, it's the first time I get to talk to a pair of sisters who've written an album together. Number two, it's the first time I talked to someone who's played and written with Steve Earle in quite a long time. No matter what you think of Steve Earle, I don't think anyone can deny that he is one of the greatest songwriters of all time, perhaps one of the best ever, and certainly of his generation, of my generation, of whatever generation you are, Steve Earle will always rank amongst the top singer-songwriters ever. And to get to talk to someone who's literally 1 degree of separation from that is pretty special. My guests for this episode are Bonnie and Eleanor Whitmore of the Whitmore Sisters. Bonnie and Eleanor are no strangers to the music industry, have been both writing and producing and singing and releasing albums in the Americana, alt-country, no depression, country rock, folk rock genre, whatever you want to call it these days. And they're pretty damn good. You may have heard of Eleanor Whitmore. She and her husband, Chris Masterson, are the husband-wife duo of the Mastersons. The Mastersons also are part of Steve Earle's backing band, the Dukes, so hence the Steve Earle connection. We talk quite a bit about Steve in this episode, so for those who are big fans, you're going to like this one. Bonnie herself has been in the industry too for a number of years, having written a number of solo albums, and has also been in and around, you name it, the who's who of songwriters within that Americana genre. And if there's one positive of the pandemic, it's that it gave the time for Eleanor and Bonnie to write an album together. I talked to Bonnie and Eleanor from their home in LA just after Ghost Stories came out, which was released in January of 2022. Ghost Stories, it's a heck of a listen. It is an emotional powerhouse. We talk about 4 songs from the record: Hurtin' for a Letdown, which I mistakenly call Hurtin' for a Breakdown in their interview, Ghost Stories, Greek Tragedy, and The Ballad of Sissy and Porter. Each song is special, each song is unique, each song is intensely personal, but written in a way that everyone can relate to it. And we cover quite a bit on this podcast. We talk about racism, we talk about death, we talk about drugs, we talk about life. We talk about celebrating and enjoying and not taking life for granted. So yeah, this episode gets pretty dark at times. It gets pretty emotional, and I want to thank Bonnie and Eleanor for opening up and being so forthcoming and frank with our interview. It's kind of rare to get people to emote and talk openly like this, and I just want to take note of that and thank them for doing that with me. And for those keeping score at home, Bonnie answers the first question, and then Eleanor answers it as well, and as you can tell from being sisters, they do finish each other's thoughts and complete each other's sentences. So buckle up, folks, grab some handkerchiefs, get ready, because this is a doozy. Please welcome Bonnie and Eleanor Whitmore to 4Songs. Thank you, Bonnie and Eleanor, for being with me tonight. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Good. So, I started this almost 2 years ago when the pandemic was just getting started, and here we are almost 2 years later. And I asked everyone the same first question just because it's still happening. How have you all been the last couple of years?
Well, floopy. We just learned a new word called floop, and I think that sort of describes us a bit, where it's like good and bad and anxiety and like happiness and stress and all of those things. It's floop.
Yeah, that's a good word. Yeah.
I think it's been interesting to kind of, just keep pivoting once we got stuck at home to, get over the shock of being stuck at home and then trying to find, cool things to do with our time, which I think we did a good job of. And then, as everything has kind of as we've gotten back to work,
the comeback, it's still coming, and it's a lot of change.
Still kind of uncertain and a lot of pivoting, and it's, things aren't normal yet.
Yeah. So this is a podcast about songs and songwriting. I always wanted to be a songwriter. I never could do it. And so I love talking to people like you two who just do it so well. And we'll talk about ghost stories for most of the conversation. But before we do that, I just wanted to just give an insight into your journey into music. I mean, you've both played with and toured with and written songs with a who's who of classic, what we call Americana, I guess, for lack of a better term, from Steve Earle to the Mastersons, Dork Powell and Shooter Jennings. I mean, it goes on and on and on. I mean, so for each of you, I mean, who have you learned the most from in terms of writing and songwriting, and what were the biggest lessons that they imparted to you?
Well, I always credit my parents first off. I think we both do.
Our dad is a songwriter, so I guess his influence probably started pretty young. And he listened to a lot of really great songwriters and covered a lot of great songwriters as well.
Which we didn't know that they were covers until later. So we just assumed they were all my dad's songs. And we were like, oh, wait, that's a Bob Dylan tune. Yeah, it is, you know?
But then I've also learned a lot just from working with a lot of the songwriters that I've played with over the years. We've played with a couple hit songwriters, Bruce Robinson and Susan Gibson.
Kelly Willis, I was thinking of too, and
Kelly
Kim
Willis
Ritchie.
is a great songwriter.
Those were early influences on us, for
and
sure.
Then obviously playing with Steve Earle as one of the greatest living songwriters. And, you know, I think you learn something from each of those people. It's hard to say who would be the most influential. But
well, it's hard to say, like I think of James McMurtry as like one of the best songwriters out there doing it, and being around that and touring with him like I had pre-pandemic. But I don't write like him. You know, I would say I maybe write more like somebody like John D. Graham or something of that sort. But I mean, I think you get influence from good storytellers as to wanting to be able to tell your own story in a way that is unique.
So when you say you write differently, I mean, how, and not to disclose your secrets, but just how does the process work for both of you?
Well, I think a lot of the songwriting that I have approached is from a place of therapy. And so I'm writing about something that I'm trying to go through. And of course, the intention is to want other people to empathize with me, or if somebody's going through something similar, then it reaches them as well. It's not just a selfish endeavor. But like when I think of how James McMurtry writes, he writes like, I always would sort of say this as the opener. It's like, I'm here to soften you up so you can fully receive the humanity that is James McMurtry and his writing style. Because he writes about so many different characters, and depending on who is listening, identifies with that character. And I think it's a beautiful way of writing. Like it's like a book and a song, you know. But I also know that like Bruce Robinson, as we mentioned, he has a way of being able to say something so poignant but so simply that it makes you like almost angry at him for writing that song so well and have it flow so easily. So I think that's my challenge to myself, is to not just write about like my own personal issues, but also to write a song that is going to be easily to consume, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think, okay.
As in the pop element, there's always that kind of, I think, influence on both of us too. It's like, we want it to be catchy.
Mm-hmm. Well, so when you were growing up, did you both have, like Eleanor and Bonnie, did you both have different tastes at some point where your tastes diverged? Because you mentioned Madonna and just that 80s, because I grew up.
She highly influenced me in some very questionable ways, I think.
Yeah, I was like really into Erasure when I was a kid. And I don't know if that describes my musical taste at all these days, but
no, I understand.
But there is something about the kind of, I think there is like sort of androgyny in a lot of the music that came out in the 80s that spoke to a different wildness to it, where it was not necessarily gender fluid. And I don't know, I feel like I got really into Bjork in like middle school, which was not normal for a lot of my friends even, you know. So it's just kind of like, I think even when there was popular music to be consumed, we were still like, my first love record wise was like Bonnie Raitt's Nick of Time. And I think that would be a perfect example of like Americana, because I mean, there was like Jamaican drums on one track and then like weird other rototoms on other, but somehow it worked as this sort of like acoustic album, you know, like very folksy, I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of whimsy to our approach, I think, to songs.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Ghost Stories, which as I said, I think it's brilliant. There's so many beautiful pieces to it, and they're just different sounds. Like there's Cajun, I hear a lot of Cajun, and I even hear some like kind of Irish dirge kind of sound too throughout. So I mean, I think we're at that point in the pandemic where albums have been written and recorded and now released since it all started. It was how Ghost Stories got together. Is that correct? That you all started talking about this.
Bonnie and I have been talking about making a record really for our whole lives, but haven't really put it forward as a priority. We're both procrastinators. We're both very busy with other projects, and the pandemic was definitely a gift of time. And it's something that kind of, you know, we thought about, but Chris Masterson, my husband and a co-bandmate, the Mastersons and Steve Earle and the Dukes, we have to blame or thank him.
Yeah, we have to credit him, whether it's good or bad, for basically pushing us to make this happen.
I mean, so the album itself covers a number of issues, but it seems like there's a central theme on death, love, and redemption. And it seems like, but the songs themselves we'll be talking about are very different in how they sound, you know, from the Ballad of Sissy and Porter, Hurtin' for a Breakdown, Ghost Stories, and Greek Tragedy. Was there any kind of like ground rules when you were putting these songs together? I mean, did you bring songs to the table, or were these written together, all of them, or how did that?
Majority of them were written together. A few of them, or a couple of them, like Sissy and Porter, I'd written with Bonnie Montgomery, so that was a complete work.
Hurtin' for a Letdown.
Hurtin' for Letdown, although Hurtin' for the Breakdown is a good title. I think we might need to do that one. That'll be yours.
When the van breaks down. Hurtin' for a Letdown, Bonnie already had.
I had that one.
Written. But we had some other kind of songs that weren't finished yet that we helped each other finish out, like Greek Tragedy and
Learn to Fly,
and Superficial World of Love.
But Friends We Leave Behind was the first song. We'd actually written that one a couple years beforehand. And that one, like a lot of these songs were inspired by friends that we had lost. And so there is that kind of need to express grief. And Friends We Leave Behind was after we lost our friend George Reef. And so that was kind of a cathartic one.
And we already had it finished, so that was at least...
It was sort of the template.
It was one that we had to start with, and that kind of like set the tone for where we were going with the album.
So what I like about it is, I mean, and it's not just a snapshot in time. Like I know there's a time and place for what we call a pandemic project. I mean, this podcast is a pandemic project, but this sounds like it could have been recorded at any point.
I think that's something that is really important to me, is to, when you do make a recording, for it to be something that's timeless, that doesn't sound like dated at some point. You want to be able to draw on elements that don't necessarily put it in a time and place. I think that's really important for the longevity of the art.
But there is something about what we all have been going through over the past few years, and especially these past couple of years. Like I think we've lost a lot of people just to this, you know, virus and everything. But, you know, previous to that, there was we'd lost some friends, but also, you know, legendary people that we've lost over the years, including like Betty White a few weeks ago, you know. So I think there's this universal loss that we are understanding and collectively going through. So it did help influence kind of the theme all, because loss is universal, and I think we all need help in dealing with that, especially with the pandemic, because I think a lot of people have been dealing with depression that they haven't really necessarily had to go through or feel before. And for someone who's chronically depressed like myself, like it was like kind of almost having a moment of everybody empathizing with me. And I was like, oh, this is how I think all the time.
Yeah, well, what's the secret for it to sound timeless? I mean, I know that sounds like a really stupid question, because I know it's not an easy answer, but
it's really not easy at all. Honestly, so Hurtin' for a Letdown is a good example of a song that is kind of written, and it sounds like a throwback song. It's like a country shuffle. It's a very traditional sounding tune. And I think a lot of people would approach that in a way where they would record it and put it in that throwback feel. But it just sounds kitschy, and like, it's just never going to sound like a tune from, you know, a country tune from the 40s. You're just never going to
It's not going to capture it.
It's not going to be captured in that way. So Chris really, pushed us to kind of like change up the way we approach that, so that it wasn't just a traditional country shuffle on the drums. We kind of took the drums apart and kind of orchestrated the parts a little bit more. We added a lot of like mellotron and fun elements that weren't traditional country, a lot of whimsy to that song to so that it didn't sound like it was like a time capsule kind of a piece.
You're right. It does have that kind of. It sounds like it could have been written by like Dwight Yoakam, or even Graham Parsons could have done something like this. But just how did this one come together for you?
I was pulling from that template because I felt like it was like taking a different spin on the heartbreak. Instead of blaming the other person, it's sort of like admitting to the fact that it's an addiction to heartbreak instead. And I've always had this suicidal heart, essentially, and I don't need to be in a relationship to be in love with somebody. Let's just put it that way. So I can just sort of pull from that. But that's a whole therapy session in itself. So that was just my way of kind of like riding through my feelings at the time.
Yeah, and I like though that it's fun too, in a sense. Like there's a sense of humor to it, which I always find that to be really hard to do in writing, and that just comes natural. Because I just think that shows that you take the craft seriously, but you're not taking yourself too seriously. And I think that's where a lot of songwriters kind of go wrong, is that they take themselves too seriously.
Well, I think that's something that it is really difficult to accomplish that. And I just am sort of thankful when it comes through, because I don't always expect it. I kind of did the same approach with another song called Fuck with Sad Girls, which was that sort of wanting to take a sentiment that I feel like is said daily to people that suffer from depression and sort of spinning it. So it's like more of a joke or more lighthearted to the sentiment and really empowering the person who's experiencing it. And that I really love that sort of like alone how I rule, because that's what it feels like to me. Like it's not a need for conforming to what everybody else seems to want. It's more of like identifying like I don't necessarily want this, and it's okay. I feel like if you approach it with whimsy or with a little bit of humor, it's more easier to
It's more
swallow.
accessible.
Yeah, it's more relatable. And I think that's what makes this work so well, is that it is something that people hear like, okay, I know about that feeling. It's like sometimes.
Well, and even going into a different song with Ghost Stories, that was a song that we had completed, and we decided that it really wasn't our story to tell, so we pulled the lens back and rewrote it more pertaining to the systemic nature of violence in our society. And I think that actually did a lot to more show, kind of all marginalized groups that are being taken advantage of in that way.
Yeah, because that was one of the songs I wanted to talk about, because I love all these songs, but this one is the one that stood out to me, I think, just because it's relevant and it's relatable, but it is
more political.
And it's political. But that's what, to me, that's what makes it works so well, is that it's timeless too. But I know that it was inspired by Elijah McClain. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think that's a good example of, like, as a songwriter, you don't always just finish the song and then you're done. Like we went back to that song and completely rewrote it, because written only about Elijah McClain, that isn't our story to tell. And it is a much bigger story of what's happening in our society. And so I think it was a really good exercise for us to pull the lens back and to rethink that one. And I think it is more relatable in that way, because there was a huge story of violence in our society, and people being, their lives taken prematurely because of their skin color or because of their sexuality.
If we had met, I would have loved you. We could have made our own story, but you disappeared like a shadow into the dark. Knowing now what you went through deepens the pain that you're gone. There's nothing left but to tell.
Oh, and it's so rooted and that's like, there is one thing to talk about racism and that whole white supremacy aspect of it, but we do need to actually start talking about, like, we can't just talk about the one individual story saying, oh, this was so sad and this is terrible. We need to talk about the fact that this is systemic. This is something that's problematic within the policing structure, within the judicial system. These are all the things that we actually need to look to the root of the cause, that in order to establish change, to make it better so this doesn't keep happening.
Well, and even what you're seeing now is, after all of this awareness of police violence, now you're seeing a rise in violence against policemen. And so, like, I think it's really important for us to look at the root causes of these things and to try to make our society and our communities better, make policing work for the communities.
And building community.
Build community.
Yeah. And make that the focus of what our cities and towns and all those type of things. When we actually look and bond together, we do a lot to basically disperse that for everybody. So it's not fair to just pick on one sort of thing. It's the fact that we actually need to utilize the fact that some of us are more privileged than others. We need to talk about not just equality, but equity, Yeah. And in order to do that, that actually helps everybody, not just individually, but we're systematically seeing it across all spectrums, even with the like infrastructure of our country needs to be.
We're seeing the rise in homelessness, and it does really feel like we have a moment here to kind of like look at some of these root causes instead of just ignoring them. I mean, it's not a
pretending it doesn't exist doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah.
We need to tend to our gardens, rooting out what is rotten, sowing the seeds myself. See love in everyone.
But how do you know when you're writing a song like this that you got it right? Because I think you've talked about how hard that is, just given that this has been obviously something that our country's been dealing with since our founding. And at some point, it's not our story to tell, but in a way it is, in the sense that in terms of recognizing that we need to do better. I mean, how did you know when you got this one right?
Well, when we wrote the original story, we did actually ask other people to give their opinion and really listen to that. And so that was what really...
I've never done that before with a
Right.
song. I've never written something that I wasn't sure if it was the right way to go. And so...
Or knowing thinking about it, okay, the reason why I kind of came to this with a different perspective is because on my previous record, I had written a song about rape culture. And I shared, or I was inspired by a friend's account, and that was implemented in the song. It wasn't her story specifically, but when she was aware of it, I had essentially created the same violation to her by that.
She was hurt.
And that wasn't a place that I ever wanted my songwriting to be. It is a selfish endeavor a lot of times. In order to talk about something or write about something, you get influenced by a lot of things and inspiration from different things. So the inspiration isn't necessarily wrong. It's when you write it and then it's received, and to be able to take that into account and say, you know what, if this is what is being felt, then I need to go back to the drawing board, and I need to rewrite this in a way to actually get the message that we are actually trying to speak to. It's not just about Elijah McClain. It's about all of the people that's been through. And by pulling the lens back and still letting his story inspire the songwriting of it, we still got to talk about things that are more important and that we actually need to focus on. It's not about the victim. It's about changing it to where we're supporting the survivors of these events, that we are not pointing our finger at something and saying that's wrong. We need to be looking at ourselves individually and saying, how can we do better?
Right.
How can we make this better for other people? And so approaching the song in that way really allowed us to feel empowered by the song more, instead of just, a murder ballad.
I just like the way it ends with the fiddle just takes off toward, and I think that kind of leaves you with it. And the same thing, we'll get back to the first song, but it kind of does lead in a little bit to the Greek tragedy, and the way the song ends with the orchestration, just it leaves you somewhat inspired in a way.
Up and up and up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that we tried to. We kind of used melody to kind of lift and celebrate some of the lives, not to celebrate the tragicness, but to try to celebrate the lives that have been lost. And I think that death can be something that's really sad and horrible for the people that are left behind. But because in our society we're uncomfortable talking about death, I think it's something that we need to be more comfortable with. And I think it's important that we celebrate the people that have gone on to the other side. And so
we are the memory keepers. And that's, I want to remember the people I've lost that I really care about. I want to have their memory. I want it to not always hurt. And I feel like when you can share a story or sing a song about them, I think that allows them to keep going within you. And that's what I really want to do for my grief. And I think that's what we're trying to inspire in other people in order to at least allow yourself to go through it.
Yeah. And I think also there's a way to do that in song where it's not just sad. And I think that's what we tried to do with the melodies, to balance out the sadness with this, with the
uplifting melody,
to celebrate their memories.
I mean, a song like Greek Tragedy, which I think is a very personal song, just kind of going back from ghost stories. I think there's just a lot of real personal touch to it. But again, it's not specific. I mean, I understand it's about Justin Townes Earle.
It was inspired. We've lost a lot of people, though, to addiction. And that's kind of the whole thing. It's especially in the sense of losing somebody to suicide or addiction. There's almost, within the sadness or even the anger that you might feel, there's also kind of relief that person doesn't have to carry that burden anymore, and understanding that. So I think that was where I was coming from when we were writing the song.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, when I listen to it, it's really touching. And the lines like "stars tell on you, wishing you'd found the clues." I mean, I think we can all think of someone in our lives who has been through something like that.
Yeah,
it's got to be pretty hard to write.
It's so easy for someone else to see it clearly, but if you're the person that's within the weeds of it, you can't. You know.
And I think that's the hardest thing about addiction is that everyone else can see it, but the person that's in it, and it's really difficult.
Now, was this one hard to write, I wonder? Which I know is a very broad question, but
I think this took a little bit of working.
Yeah, we worked.
She originally started the melody on the, what was that?
It's an auto harp melody. And so I kind of had the melody already, and then, Justin had just recently passed, and so that's kind of like what led to the exploration of that song. But I had to, again, pull the lens back. It couldn't just be about him. It would be too hurtful. It's hurtful, and it's not just about Justin. There are so many people that we've lost to addiction and that we lose every single day. It's an epidemic in this country.
It was the kind of catalyst, though, because when he died, it was sort of like a remembrance of everyone before that we knew. And that's the thing that kind of goes into this as far as the need to write the song,
I guess, addiction is just so hard because it's often, something that's programmed in your genes, and it's once it, the drug gets its hook in you, it's really hard to move past that. So it's definitely something that a lot of people have struggled with, and whether they're personally or with a loved one. So,
well, I want to thank you both for your time and being so open. And I got one more song I want to talk about, and that's the opener, Ballad of Sissy and Porter. And to me, it's just a fun song to listen to because it has that Cajun kind of riff. And again, what I like about it is that you kind of rewrite the story, I think, and you don't really know what happens at the end. And
well, it was inspired by Chris Porter, and I think that was a good way of trying to describe him. Like he was the type of spinner of yarn, that like even if you were there and part of the story that he was telling, you wouldn't always recognize the story. Like there was truth to every part of it, but there was always a little bit of,
a lot of fiction.
a lot of
he kind of missed his calling as a comedian, but even though I didn't co-write that particular song,
she had already written a really excellent song that really captured him, and so I was wanting to.
It was called "The Last Laugh," which again, when we were writing that song for our Masterson's record, that was I wanted it to come across how funny he was, and that, like, it's still kind of a sad song, but
I still hear his laugh. That's the thing, and so it's like his laughter will always be something that I can pull from memory, and just. When I sat down with Bonnie Montgomery to write this song, I was wanting to kind of tell our love story without telling our love story, and that sort of way of capturing him. I feel like I did a really good job. So.
Sissy left out in the pouring rain. Says she's going somewhere she can change her name. Fire in her hair, a little sparkle in her eye. Little did she know what would happen next. 'Cause Porter was as loaded as a hot jet. When they hit the border, they were high as a kite in the middle of a hurricane. Golden morning Cajun nights, take the highway to the northern lights, where the drinks are strong and the music feels right. Porter, baby, take me by the hand, swing me dancing into the wind, just spinning yarn and talking about places we never been.
I like the lines like "just like a storm when it's blowing in and it's over as fast as it began," and then "holding on to lightning ain't something you can do for long."
Yeah.
I mean, I think again, it just this is gonna be like a really dumb question, but just those analogies I just think are so apt in so many different things, and just do those lines just kind of come to you? I mean, obviously they do, but I mean, do they kind of rattle around and you're like, I got this great line, where can I use it, or does it kind of like all at once come out in a song like that?
Well, so we had that experience with Bonnie was through this whole House of Songs weekend. And so we were co-writing with multiple people. And she and I were kind of like the last ones. And she's got this really awesome, country drawl about her. And I was actually hoping that she'd want to do the song, which is also why I didn't do it from first person, But we were just sort of talking about it, and it just sort of, I was explaining, she didn't actually know Porter either, which made it even more entertaining for me. So I was just telling different stories and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that we were discussing was that when he did pass away, it was like a really bright light went out,
Lights on the porch burning all night long. Sissy says, Porter, baby, play my song. A wish and a hope like a charm against the pain. Just like a storm when it's blowing in,
And so I think that was the kind of like inspiration behind that line, was just, it was like, lights went out and we were all kind of.
It happened also at a really like a traumatic time. It was like right before the election.
Right before the election.
And like
it
all
was
of
a
these,
rough year. That year we lost Bowie and Prince
I just kept thinking about like what he would have said if he had been able to stick around and see what all had happened.
Many good one-liners were missed out because of it. And so I think that like all of those sort of things were wanting to express the grandness of his personality. He was kind of like the modern day Blaze Foley in that way. It just it hurt a lot when we lost him, and so I felt very much the need to keep writing songs about him.
Golden morning Cajun nights, take the highway to the northern lights, where the drinks are strong and the music feels right. Oh, baby, take me by the hand, swing me dancing into the wind.
Well, the album is fantastic, and these 4 songs, I like them because they just sound very different. I mean, musically, did you have they were any harder to get done than others, just because they are very different, and 2 are very kind of, they're all very emotional, but the ghost stories and Greek tragedy, I think, as you talked about, have an uplifting end to them. Were any just songs that were just hard to kind of get that right feeling at the end, like musically?
I don't think so. I think we didn't have a lot of pressure. We didn't have a record deal at the time, and so there wasn't really anybody standing over us micromanaging what we were doing. So we just had a lot of freedom, and I think you can find a lot of creativity when you have that freedom. So we just had fun, dressing up these songs and.
Yeah, going into a project without expectations definitely allows a lot of freedom, and I think, synergy to commence under those circumstances. And the thing about it is that Eleanor and I work well together, and that's not always the case going into these type of things. You're not really sure, but in this particular one, we'd already known our working relationship from participating in our previous projects. This one, it was almost like we didn't have to finish complete sentences with each other. It just was easy. Surprisingly easy.
Well, good. Well, I want to thank you both again for your time tonight as we wrap up.
Thank you,
Rob.
We kind of talked this at the beginning, but what are your expectations for 2022?
I don't have any.
Trying to take over the world.
I don't have any expectations left. I've pivoted and reconfigured so many times.
What's Ray Riley Hubbard say? It's like your best days are kept when your expectations are low, or something along those lines.
Yeah, definitely want to keep no expectations. I think we're just really happy that the record has been well received so far, and we hope we can tour these songs and come out and play for some folks. We're coming through DC in the spring. So. Oh,
great. Well, I will definitely be checking that out. So, well, again, thank you both for your time, and it's been wonderful talking with you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Whew. Well, thank you, Bonnie and Eleanor, for your time and for being so open and sharing so much. This was, like I said, this was a doozy. This was emotional, but I learned a hell of a lot. I hope you did too. I hope you enjoyed this one. I don't know when I'll be back. As I said, you better subscribe and follow me on Twitter at 4songs2 so you can keep up with me. Anyway, thank you again, and I'll be talking to you at some point in the future. See ya.